If I'd like to ask Latif, Ladid, Jim Hodges, and John Curran to come on up. We're going to do just kind of a quick wrap-up, give you all one more shot at some industry experts. Okay, so these folks are going to be hit with a lot of the spur-in-the-moment questions. I'm going to ask them each. First, to start with, we're going to start with Latif. Just give me your overall observations of it, just maybe one thing in particular that struck you, you learned today, or that was struck you about today. I know you've been sitting down here the entire time.
Yes, well, progress is a secret hidden in the future. And today we have been trying to dig through the future in order to find that secret. So some are very optimistic and they're moving into the right direction. Some are standing still, some are waiting. So, pioneers always show the way to everyone. In terms of IP, like with any singer, they land a hit and they become famous. So IP is one of these rare hits, and IPv6 is not a remix, it's a new hit. It's going to be far, far bigger. And I think everyone that will contribute to this one will be a star in this venture.
Okay, Jim.
Wow, how do I top that? I guess for me coming into it, I spent some time trying to, in my own mind, encapsulate what are all the drivers, what are all the issues, and I think we've touched on these a number of times. I think the audience is familiar with them, but I guess the key takeaway for me is similar to what Latif said. I think industry really understands what the issues are. We understand what the options to fix it, how to deal with it are, both sort of on an interim basis and a long-term basis. It's just that sort of that gnarly period in between when we're in kind of dual stack mode and we have to deal with not knowing when some of these issues have to be dealt with. And we heard a couple of presentations say, well, if you haven't started already in your back office, it's probably already too late. And that's probably a valid statement, but there still is kind of an open-ended structure to this in terms of being able to have a business plan. We also heard, well, a business plan should be basically focus on connectivity. Don't try and turn this into a positive business case in terms of selling services, because that's not necessarily the best approach when really what you're talking about is making sure that the internet is successful. And I don't think we have to, from that perspective, have a really solid business case, because as Latif said, the internet has been wildly successful, and that's the good news story in all this. All this growth, and all these trillions and trillions of IP addresses someday will generate revenue for the ISPs and for the providers. So I think it's really a positive thing. I think the only frustration is probably as an industry we all have is what's the window for getting this done. And as as somebody who follows industries, we always like to have kind of a start, an interim period, and some sort of a window when there's going to be some completion. And I don't think we honestly as an industry have that. And that's just the nature of this business. It's so fluid, it's so dynamic. The growth has been unbelievable, and these IP devices, whether they're going to be smart fridges or everybody's going to have an iPhone when they're 5 years old, it's going to happen, and it's happening a lot faster than I think probably we always thought it would. So from that perspective, the challenges are great to make this happen, and it's a bit frustrating as an industry that it's going to take us some time to get there.
Okay, John.
So probably what's most surprising to me is more of a meta comment on today's seminar. I was most surprised when I sat through the sessions and looked at the people here at the quality of the people involved. And credit to you, Carol. The people who are on the panels and in the room are people who truly are experts in this field. You'll go to a seminar or a workshop and find one or two of those people in a day-long seminar. You have a dozen in the room here, people I've trained, people I've learned from, people I've worked on the standards with, and the people who are actually making deployment decisions for the internet as a whole are in the room today. And I was very impressed with the caliber of the team that was brought together for this and the quality of the presentations. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great. So let me ask, and I want to sort of follow up on something that Jim said. You're talking about the window here. And again, each of you, and this time I'll start, Jim, with you. Is there anything you can see that would immediately dramatically accelerate that window? And particularly, I'm thinking in terms of the mobile applications, the M2M applications, if there was something that took off that would cause the industry to go, okay, now.
I mean, I think that's the nature of the business. I think nobody knows what the next viral application is going to be. We know it's going to happen. It's just, what is it? Again, I don't...
But do you think it's possible that kind of thing could happen?
Do you think it will happen again, in terms of like another Facebook or something like that? Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, I think those opportunities are still out there. As I said, it's just a matter of letting the industry or letting the subscribers decide what they want in industry to deliver in terms of content. And I think if you try to sit down with probably the smartest 30 people in the world 20, 30 years ago about all this social networking, I don't think we would have seen the trends that much and just how fundamental it's changed everything. So, yeah, I think that's just the nature of, you find a service that just resonates with the whole world on a global basis, and it's really hard to predict that.
Okay. Latif, I'm sorry, John wanted to go next. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
I'll yield to Latif first if he wants.
No, you go first.
Okay. So we actually have a lot of killer apps for IPv6, but people don't see them every day. What's happening in the mobile handset world is inevitably driving IPv6 because you can't get enough v4 addresses, you can't hold them persistent for long enough. So if you want to have a unique address that's actually stable, you're going to run v6, and all the mobile handset operators know this. There's actually specs for next generation equipment that says you must support v6. Optionally, you can support v4. Okay? Literally, there are people who browse the internet right now with IPv6 and don't know it because you don't know the IP address on your handset. It goes and gets one from the mobile operator, and it might be that you're right now using IPv6 on a mobile network and you'll never know it. But as that increases over time, the ability of that device to get to IPv6 enabled websites, whether it's for audio, whether it's for video, whether it's for merchant services and payment, is going to be much better than the ability of them to get to IPv4 sites. They'll still be able to reach your site, but they'll reach a competitor's site that's IPv6 enabled, and it will be faster and it will be easier. I get phone calls now and then from people who say, I'm wondering about how this will work over IPv6. And it can be a lot of things. Geolocation for IPv4 to IPv6 gateways is completely broken. Okay? We know that. Now, some people in the room rely on geolocation to want to know where the customer's coming from. You can't. If you're IPv6 enabled, you can get similar information. But if you're just IPv4, all your customers come from one place. Certain security libraries are the same way. Certain payment libraries are the same way. And unless you turn on v6, as these applications happen, it's not that you'll be left out, but you'll be second class. So I think there are killer apps. They're in mobile, RFID. They're in areas that aren't directly connected to the internet, but very quickly will be. And they're happening. It's just a question of whether or not they're happening in the particular businesses that are in this room.
Okay.
It's about having competitive networks that will cope with the new things that are coming up. Many of them have been now developed on a proprietary level, like Internet of Things, smart grid, cloud computing. Cloud computing is something that's not going to work the way we know it. So they need also IP addressing. So we have to educate this world in how to use networking and interoperable smart devices. There is a slew of many applications that are designed in the US. Unlike now in China and Japan, they are focused very much on IPv6 and doing these things right away. So it's like the word upside down. The US designed the internet and then led it to Asia to design the second one, and then you'll start buying their kits from there. Most of the cameras and TV sets and so on in Korea and Japan are running on IPv6. So most probably you have devices in your pockets that are v6 enabled and you don't even know it, or you can't even use it. So the first missing link is the native IPv6 service from your ISP. And it has to be, it's not only network parity or service parity, it's business model parity. As Igor has very well explained it, they had to make sure that geolocation and so on and so forth working, because that's the business model, as the advertising behind it is based on these things, as John has mentioned. So it's, the killer application is in the business model parity. That's what works today will work on IPv6. If we get that done, then the rest is icing on the cake. Internet of Things and so on and so forth. They will come by themselves.
Okay, great. All right. So I also wanted to get a sense of, because in this, I think Latif and John both touched on this. It was something that struck me throughout the day, is how often people talked about the need for the applications to speak IPv6, not just the networks, not just that in fact, that's going to be one of the major challenges. How is the industry going to address that kind of challenge? Because obviously applications are driving a lot of usage right now, and applications developers are not necessarily folks who are going to be understand, or they're going to understand it, but they're not necessarily going to be the folks who are going to be able to address the issue. Go ahead, John.
So the application problem is a significant problem. And I guess the short version is, if you have people developing applications right now in your enterprise, they may or may not be aware that there's two sets of address families on the public internet, IPv4 and IPv6. A lot of them have no idea this is happening. And so that education process is probably something you want to start. Now, again, you can work around some of this, okay? You can work around this because a lot of the websites you folks operate are multi-tiered with load balancers and firewalls. And I ran a data center for a while. I've run two national backbones in a data center. And my data center had 100 different applications. Almost every one of them had an architecture which allowed us to map addresses to addresses. And so you can hide IPv6 in IPv4 and not change the rest of your application, not change anything beyond your web layer, just get temporary IPv4 addresses mapped internally. Don't change your application, don't change your database architecture. You can do that, and that works for a while. Some of the companies that have actually gone through and looked realize they have references to IP addresses in a lot of their code. That's not a good reference. Or if it is, make sure you understand you're referencing v4 or v6 and the user could be identified either way. So is there workarounds? Yeah, you can do it at the load balancer. You can do it in some of the CDNs. They're capable of doing that mapping for you as well. That's a good short-term fix. Long-term fix, talk to your application developers, let them know the public internet is changing and there are two sets of addresses out there. And that's going to be a mind share. It's going to take years for that to happen, for developers to be aware of that potential on the public internet.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess to complement John's thoughts, I guess the US is the only country that will have a secure transition because you have enough v4 address space, at least the last 3 blocks. I hope they will be dedicated for that purpose. At least you will have a secure transition, while the rest of the world is not going to have a clean and secure transition. This will be a very dirty one and very insecure, and this is where we have to put a lot of effort in the
Explain what you mean by that, that's going to be messy and insecure.
Yeah, so when you have dual stack, in this case you have a v4 routable IP address and the routable v6 address, you'll be able to do secure, especially for the enterprise and for the business. Let's not talk about the normal surfers on the internet. You can do it with whatever you like. You can even put CGN, although I'm not in favor of CGN because that will create some what I call net neutrality problem in the future, because you will be putting some people on business class and some other people on economy class. I think somebody has to look into this and not let it happen. At least in European terms, the European Commission is very concerned about this kind of monopoly in the making, as well as some kind of market distortion. This is the way the European Commission sees it. It's not the case in the US. You have a free market here, so we have better regulation in this. Now, in order to have a proper secure thing, in this case, the US has the genuine vision to deploy dual stack and v6 native, while the other countries do not have a v4 routable IP addressing, so they will have to do on one side NAT and on the other side v6. So this cannot be done for business transactions. I would not recommend it, so they would have to either stick to their current models and use v6 for any kind of new applications or for their customers in order to move to v6 directly. So we don't know what the outcome is going to be in these countries.
Okay, Jim, you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I can't disagree with John, but I think what John talked about is best practice.
Go ahead, disagree with John.
Yeah, disagree, yeah.
It's good to end the day with an argument.
Analyst career limiting move number one. But I think like it's what you talked about in terms of software practices. Maybe there needs to be sort of best practices for applications. I mean, everybody writes a lot of applications pretty quickly. Some of them are going to run in the cloud. So if there's a dependency on some sort of an IP address, and it's an IP4 address going forward, and that application does go viral, then it's even more part of the problem that you've basically kept, you basically pushed that even further because now you've got people with IPv6 devices, and you've got at the very end of the service. Everybody talks about you want IP end-to-end, so you do that, and then you go to the place where you invoke the service logic, and it's IPv4. That seems like kind of ironically a pretty bad solution, but it's potentially possible unless you have software practices that say don't do it.
Right. I just want to pick up on one thing that Latif said, just to be clear. So Asia Pacific region is out for all practical purposes today. They're in their austerity measures. RIPE is 3 months away, Europe. ARIN in North America, Canada, we are probably only good for 1 year, and then we're in the same boat. As it turns out, Latin America and Africa are the ones that have maybe 2 years from Latin America, and maybe 2 or 3. We don't know how many for Africa. It depends on whether or not there's leakage. Does a U.S. company go to its South African subsidiary and get addresses? Could change the formula a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, it's a global problem. In North America, we may have a year more than what Asia Pacific has, but in all practical timescales, a year isn't going to make a difference. It's whether or not you're hitting the wall now or whether it's just around the next bend. So we're not that far away from a practical matter.
I wanted to give the U.S. better hope than the other countries, but I think we should focus on dual stack. I think it's very good for the economy, not to get into CGN and that kind of stuff, even if it makes sense for some vendors to sell boxes and so on. No problem. Business is always good. But it's not, you have to have a vision. And the internet, survives only with visions. And I think NAT has served its duty for the last 10 years, so it has delayed V6. It's fine, no problem. But the future is not in NAT, that's for sure. All devices want to be visible. And we will move from just surfers into producers on the internet. And the future is going to be in knowledge in each one of you. And you want to be a producer on the internet. That's an absolute, it is coming. Facebook is creating the first things that people are talking to each other. They're just sharing some thoughts. And some of them are going to produce things to sell directly. So for that, you need a routable IP address. And that is the change of the internet to move back to what it was, a peer-to-peer among the big. Now it will be peer-to-peer among the small. And this is most probably the best thing that can happen to mankind.
Okay, again, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to step up to the mic. One other thing that seems to be persistent, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse here, but because Latif just referred to it, the notion of carrier-grade NAT or CGN. I've been covering telecom now for longer than I want to admit, and I've seen equipment that was temporarily put in the network. I've very rarely seen equipment go into the network that doesn't stay for a significant period of time. So if in fact there is a fair amount of carrier-grade NAT deployed over the next year or two as part of this transition, what are the chances that's going to be a very short-term solution, and what are the chances that's going to be a longer-term problem? And John, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, so carrier-grade NAT is an interesting situation. There's a lot of ways that you can make use of NAT. You can continue connecting customers with private IPv4 space and NAT it to IPv4 and completely ignore IPv6 for now. So that's how an ISP who's run out of address space keeps using v4. You can maybe, when you've got some v6 sites that you need to gateway in, NAT those in as well, so that your customers who are v4 only can still get the v6 only websites, which we'll start seeing soon. The problem is that over time, the layers of NAT become very hard to manage, and the performance becomes very unpredictable. It only takes, you can have a lot of customers running through NAT who are all getting their traffic. Their mail and web works fine. And I set up one video streaming session through your NAT box, I quite frankly am going to take the majority of the traffic. So the people who are betting on NAT to provide service are relying on a sort of last-ditch attempt to provide internet connectivity. It may look like the internet. It may work like the internet. It doesn't have any SLAs, and it can't. It literally can't. So I think that we will see NAT. There'll be places where people will cling desperately to the current architecture and will use NAT in order to continue to serve customers with the minimum change possible. But what they're offering you, well, business and economy class is how Latif said it. What they're offering you is an internet that can never have an SLA. I don't know, you might be able to get away with serving that for some customers, but sooner or later, that's a dead-end business model. So if you head down that road, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I don't know how you suddenly develop the expertise and the transition plan to get you to dual stack. But hey, you know, every ISP will make its own choice, every hosting company. That's, the market will work it all out.
I guess to complement this, you know, if you want to have happy customers, you empower them more, not you take something away from them. So if they see that they are not getting the internet service, but they are getting a telecom internet service, they'll be waking up and asking for something else. And most probably they will run to the mobile world, which is most probably, for the time being, they're not doing that. But if they move the mobile internet to V6, most probably the fixed are going to be phased out. There are losers in this thing. I'm warning them because in Asia, they are moving V6 into the mobile world. And the fixed guys are not, like it happened to them anyway in the past. The telecom world had fixed voice, and when the GSM came in Europe, they didn't want even to talk to them. So most of these guys have been thrown out, and they build the biggest industry in the world. Now the telecom companies are buying their own subsidiaries back for billions of dollars. Will that happen also with IPv6 mobile devices, service providers as well? So, you know, it's only a question of time.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, just a couple of points. I look and track kind of, you know, the mobile broadband experience, and you're right. I mean, obviously, you know, there's really, I think for the first time in the mobile space, there's really no limitation on the end user device. It seemed to whenever we had 3G technology, the first handsets came out, there was battery issues, connectivity price. But really now, because these are IP devices, the future's wide open. You know, they're low cost, there's all kinds of choices. So the mobile operators have a real opportunity, especially as they go to 4G. They've got really true, pure broadband. If they want to deliver video services, they can do it. So the fixed ISPs really have to be careful. They want to offer video services and they want to do it through NATs, then they're going to have all kinds of challenges, and I agree that's not really a long, sustainable business model. I mean, you know, it just makes sense that you have to have an IP connectivity for all your services, and you know, if an ISP doesn't do that, then they're going to be in trouble in the long term.
Okay, we have a question. Go ahead.
Hi, Alejandro. A question for John. You made an interesting claim that we will see soon some IPv6 only services. Some people who have no choice but to do IPv6 only because there's no v4 address. But given that we have seen from the World IPv6 Day stats that there is essentially 0.0 something % of users who can actually reach those sites, what is the business model to go and offer only the service over IPv6?
Right. The business model is when you have several million devices, you're going to have to number when you roll out your network, and you can't possibly obtain several million IPv4 addresses. So mobile phone networks, RFID, smart grid, sensor networks.
I understand the notion of putting that on the user device. I was questioning about using this as a service, on a server, web server or something like that.
Well, so if you've got several million devices on the user end running v6, how do you want to run your server? Not with v6?
So you will essentially, the business model is to serve only those users but not the rest of the internet.
Well, so again, let's take a case. We now are seeing a huge push. I was at the Internet of Things conference in Europe a couple of weeks ago at the European Commission, and we're talking about what it takes to intelligently manage power and electrical power worldwide. We're in a circumstance where a 1% savings in peak power could result in a 5 or 10% cost reduction and potentially similar carbon reduction. It has to do with the fact that the power used at the exact peak at any given moment turns out to be the most expensive and highest carbon generating power. So the ability to reach out to devices and just nudge a small number of them off means you need to have a network that's going to scale to thousands of devices on a street and hundreds of millions of devices in any given region. So if you build that, it turns out you get a whole bunch of other benefits. Security alarms turn out to be pretty easy because you're going to end up with sensors on whether people are home or not because you have to know that. And there's a whole bunch of applications you can build if that infrastructure is built for the power company. All that infrastructure is going to be running over IPv6. So there's an example where we're going to start having a whole system of devices over the next 4 or 5 years that the native way you reach them is V6. Will someone gateway them back to V4? Probably. Will it be as easy to write an application that uses them? No.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We're going to make this our last question. You get the last question of the day.
Okay. First of all, I want to answer the quiz from the morning. What's the difference between a pipe of 4-inch and 6-inch water? I think that 6-inch freezes in the north, so we are going to face also freezing in the IPv4 eventually. As a person who is developing a grid, a network for the grid, I fully agree with you, and I think this was here a classical or traditional service provider centric, and in a couple of years or 3-4 years, it will be the minority of IPX addresses or devices. Mm-hmm. So eventually we are talking about vanishing species, if you like.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right, before I ask you to help me thank this panel, I do have one more acknowledgement to make. We had, and this relates directly to something John said, complimenting the quality of the program. We had a content partner in this, and she's actually sitting in the back, Joya Sabuti from Sabuti & Associates, and I want to thank her for her help.